So welcome to Cross-Border Conversations among two masterful coaches. My name's Siobhan Murphy. My business is the Quest Connection, and I coach executives from Long Island, New York. And I'm here with my colleague, Karen.
Yeah, so I'm Karen Kellaway. I'm tuning in from Canada. Kellaway Executive Coaching is what I call my business, and I've been coaching for 15 years. I transitioned from public relations, the career in communications and public relations and media training, into coaching leaders because I thought I could make a stronger impact doing that. And we've met along the way. So what we thought would be fun was to talk about what is executive coaching and what are the benefits and how does it work? So I get that question, what's the process and how do I begin? People are still tentative about that, where to start. So I think it's quite similar in the States as it is in Canada.
I agree. And I guess I'm just noticing that you have a background in a form of communications, and I came from the telecommunications world. And
Right.
coaching is a specialized form of communication. And it's really about a type of conversation that facilitates positive change on topics that are important to the person that we're coaching. And so why don't you say a little more about coaching, and then we'll get into the process.
So it's really about taking your commitment to your career and to your organization to the next level. And there's so much change going on. And it's funny, the term change management, to me, there's just a constant churn of change and transition. And so helping leaders lead, so people will call it executive coaching or leadership coaching, and you don't have to get too caught up on the title. But if you're managing people, then you're leading. And if you're at the top of the organization, then you're leading, and you need to understand what those behaviors are that are important to do that and where you need to fill in the gaps. And so what I love, one of my favorite parts is creating the coaching plan. And I find once we create the plan with your areas of strength and where you want to develop and get the outcomes, it's pretty solid, several pages. And you're dealing with smart people and high performers, and off you go. And then you have the confidential sounding board conversations. And that's really valuable too, because you have that space where you can talk out some ideas and actions with someone who's not judging. We're just trying to figure this out together. And then that you can take that out to the rest of your staff and employees and try to get some actions and engagement and alignment.
Yes, and just a little more about that confidential sounding board. They say it's lonely at the top. A lot of times when coaching executives, they literally don't have anybody but their spouse to talk about some of the things that they talk about with their coach. And the spouse is, as you said, is attached. They can't be a non-judgmental sounding board because the spouse impacts them. So we provide that confidential and safe sounding board, but we provide so much more in terms of facilitating people's best thinking. We do that by asking questions that are hard to ask yourself sometimes, so somebody outside can see what's happening. And I think of it as interrupting the pattern of thinking that someone has.
Yeah.
So their habitual thoughts and feelings are taking them this way, but they want to be over here. So the coach has to interrupt that pattern of thinking so that over here becomes possible. I really think of it as an inner game before the outer game can happen.
The word possibilities is really important because that's where people get stuck, and there's so much pressure and so many things to get done and big picture things on objectives and goals. And so having the coach ask all those different questions, and we get that all the time, we'll stop and say, oh, that's a good question. I hadn't thought about that. And because we've coached so many people now too over our career, we have a sense of what others have gone through. And so even though it's their conversation, it's always nice to be able to add that to say, well, have you considered this? So we've seen this success before. And so you can share some stories of successes which inspire them to realize that, yeah, of course, I could take that step and I can get there. So it's nice to be at this level, I think, where we've had the years of experience to see the successes and see that it's possible, and to support that leadership. Because what I love is when people get into a new role, a senior role, and they're not really sure. They think they can do it, but they don't have quite all the tools yet, and to work with them and watch them grow into that role and see their leadership come out. If they're sincere about it and authentic about what they want to achieve, it's very rewarding.
Yeah. And I think you're talking about what we bring because we have experience with other executives. I think we sometimes normalize the experience of leadership. Because
Yeah.
sometimes people have a tendency to think it's them or it's their company when it's actually a more broad-based leadership challenge that they might be experienced, and we can draw on the successes of others to help them. I was speaking with a client about the stages of change and how the inner transition experience, people tend to make it personal to them, and it's actually a normal process that people go through. And if they can recognize that their people are going through a normal process of change, they can help them through it. And you mentioned the volume of change that people are experiencing right now. I heard it again, the term VUCA this week, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And we're really surfing the waves of VUCA right now. And some people say like, oh, I can't, they throw up their hands, I can't manage it. We're in a VUCA world. It's like being in a washing machine, you know,
Yeah.
on the inside, right? But we have a challenge to operate and find our way through that kind of turbulent water. And coaching can really help a person cut through the non-essential to get to what's really important so that they can actually act instead of being tossed around by the turbulence.
Yeah, and I think sitting in those sessions with an experienced coach, a certified coach, that is when some of the feedback that we get, which is that, oh, okay, I just figured this out in 40 minutes instead of it spinning and spinning where they've paused, and it's all about them and having that time to sort through all that, the clutter. And so in terms of where you begin, so you have a coaching client who's interested in starting. So what's your first, this is the same in Canada as I think it is in the States. Where do you start?
Well, in the beginning, we do we set the stage for what's the contract for the engagement. What does the person want to accomplish? Oftentimes, coaches will use assessments at the beginning to give a person a greater self-awareness. So that might be about their communication style or their thinking style, their behavioral traits, or it might be a 360 where we gather input from their team about the person's leadership style. So they get a view of themselves from people above them and around them and people who they serve below them. I don't like that term below so much, but
with in their, I call it in their circle.
Yeah, in their circle.
Yeah.
So that might be something that we do in the beginning. We establish some goals and have a person rate themselves either through a formal 360 online or through the feedback that they get from being in their circle being interviewed. So we set a baseline, and then you mentioned that we create a plan. So what are we going to do to move the person from where they are to where they want to be? And that becomes something behavioral that somebody can actually act on.
I think that what's scary for some people getting into it is the feedback, because the feedback is so important to getting to that next level, because we all have a blind spot. We all have areas that need to be just taken up a step. But what I also find the feedback is the validation of what you're doing well. And no matter what level I'm working with, I usually work with the senior level, but even there, it's just really, it's nice to have that validation, that it's recognized. Here's where I'm on track, so that you can do more of that. It's not so much about picking it apart at this level. It's about, let's focus what you're doing well, and then fill in where the gaps are. And that could be, if you want to get promoted, there could be different areas, committees you want to be on, or skills you need to develop. But if you're already in that top role, sometimes it's just more about behavioral leadership behaviors and how to engage your staff. You're all very different.
Right. The other thing I just want to add about 360s and giving feedback is the professional coach can elicit the kind of feedback that would be useful for the client to hear, including their strengths. And we have a way of giving feedback so that it can be heard. Sometimes cultures don't have a good culture of feedback, so the coach can help facilitate that so that it doesn't become a complaint session or something that wouldn't be actually useful to the coachee.
Yeah, I actually prefer to do questions that I can take the feedback and the data and compile it and then deliver it back to the client, where it's not verbatim, so it doesn't get mixed up in who said what. So it's all, and it's not confidential. We know who has what comments. I prefer to do it that way. So you're creating a culture of trust, because trust is such a big thing with teams. Right. And especially if it's just one person doing the coaching, that's can be a little awkward. So it's nice if you're working with an individual and their team, so they all realize, okay, we're in this together, and it's about the company and the organization where we want to go, but it's also about my value, what I bring, and how I'm going to better myself. And so coaching engagements tend to be 4 to 6 months. Could be a little longer if you're like a CEO. It tends to be a longer engagement. Or if you're onboarding into a senior role, it tends to be longer. But I find 4 months to be minimum to get traction and achieve some of the goals that you set out for yourself. And then there's always a check-in in the beginning and halfway and at the end with who you're reporting to, who your sponsor is, and if you're the CEO, then it's usually a board that we would check in with. Mm-hmm. And coaching sessions are by phone. They're in person if you're local, but like us, we're across the border, so we talk by Skype or Zoom. We talk by phone, and I find that actually I love coaching by phone because it's so focused. Once you have your plan,
all three of those modalities have advantages and disadvantages.
Yeah.
You know, when I see somebody in person, I really get a sense of their presence and their the way they conduct themselves physically in space. When people are on the phone, they can sometimes open up more because they don't have that eye contact.
Right.
And we both focus very clearly because we are missing the visual sense. But it's amazing how much you can actually hear in terms of tone, breathing. Even when there's silence, you can kind of sense the pregnant pause. So I think it adds another dimension then to add video. That's very convenient, and we get some of the blend of the phone and some of the blend of the
right
in-person coaching. Yeah.
I think we're good. So
yeah,
we take the coaching. Yes.
I just want to say a little bit about the end, the closing part of the engagement. Yeah. We would celebrate some wins and create a forward-looking plan so that the person is left in action going forward. That the coaching engagement might end, but the process of goal setting and having a plan to achieve those new behaviors continues.
Yeah, and I always like to integrate the coaching plan into their existing development and performance plan so that whoever they're reporting to can continue that. And often there's mentors that we identify to help as well. Yeah. So that because you want to keep the action and all the work you've done, you want to keep it alive. Yeah,
and I often have clients say, I heard your voice in my head. I say, once the heart connection has been connected, it always exists. And coaching engagement ends, but the coaching relationship in some ways never ends.
True.
Yeah.
So we're invested. Well, thank you, Siobhan. Nice to see you. Until next time.